We're here. This is crazy. Welcome to the Courageous Womanhood podcast. I'm Claire Johnson, and honestly, this is more than a podcast. It's literally a call to young women, all women out there, to live out radical, courageous womanhood, being women of God who are undaunted by the world, undaunted by challenges, because they know who they are as a daughter of the King of Kings. So this is the first podcast, and I'm honestly really stoked and also really nervous, to be honest with you. And so here we go. So I thought we would just start at the beginning of where's what, the who, what, where, when, why, how, what's the deal with this podcast? And honestly, God told me at the beginning of this year to start a podcast, and he gave me the name Courageous Womanhood, and then he gave me the tagline of Awakening the Lioness Inside. And honestly, I'd always cringed at podcasts because I just thought, everyone does them, everyone wants to have their voice and speak, and so I always cringed at the thought of it. And then God clearly told me that, Claire, you need to start a podcast called Courageous Womanhood. And honestly, when God tells you to do something and you know it's from him, you go for it and you give it everything you got, because my life isn't my own. I'm just here as a vessel for the King of Kings to accomplish his mission upon this earth. And so that's why we're here today. And nothing fancy. Don't have some fancy podcast studio or the whole shebang, just literally sitting outside here by my 100-square-foot camper where my husband Zadok and I live, and just sitting outside and recording this for you guys from my heart. And so all these podcast episodes are going to be really just raw and real and from my heart, unfiltered, unscripted. And so I have topics I'm planning to cover over the time of the podcast. But also I'll fill you in more throughout this episode, but really just live updates of what's on my heart, and also testimonies. I plan to just flood Courageous Womanhood podcast with these testimonies and videos. So I thought I'd kind of give a backstory about myself and who I am and what this podcast really is about in greater detail. So starting from the beginning, honestly, since I was young, I just knew there was something more. There was something that I saw, womanhood and growing up and things, and I was raised in a Christian home, but deep down inside, I'm there's something more. There's something I'm longing for something more, and I don't know what that looks like, but it looks like something that's hard and challenging and radical and not comfortable. And growing up, I would read missionary stories, and my heart would just come alive. And then I'd hear and read about women of the Bible and the women of old, and how courageous and strong they were while being wholly submitted to God. And so I just knew there was something more, and I had the call of missions on my heart. And also, since I was really young, I knew I was called to the next generation of just stirring a radical hunger and fire in young men and women, and young women in particularly. Since I was 13 years old, I just knew that was something God had put upon my heart. But yeah, I didn't really understand what it looked like. And so at 17, I went to a Christian leadership school and did 3 years of an intense outdoor leadership program, including at the end of our first year, we hiked 72 miles in 69 hours with packs on the Appalachian Trail, and just really diving into leadership and things like that. And even while I was there, I still was man, who and where are the radical burning ones for God that still long for something more, still long for that life of surrender, and live that life of holy dissatisfaction with normality? Because still I saw so often of people often with that mindset of how do I serve God within my world, in the sense of build my comfortable life and then throw God into it. And I just so knew that I wanted to live that life of sold out surrender. And so I continued through that program, and God taught me so much. We'll go deeper into different stories from there in later episodes of the podcast. Went through some of the roughest times in my life, but also came out at the end of it just so like, I guess I just always felt, and like this is who this podcast is for, like I always felt like I was marked different and I was made different, and I didn't understand why. And I was like, I didn't ever really meet young ladies that were truly sold out for God no matter what it looked like. And that's truly who this podcast is for. And also for those who, I believe this is going to stir a hunger and a fire for that something more in those who don't have it yet. And so I'm honestly just so excited. But anyway, so then went through that program, and in my second year, God gave me, like after a really rough time in my life, gave me this whole vision statement kind of for my life of what I felt I was called to do. And I like wrote it down, put it away, and kind of didn't touch it. Like I knew I would touch it at some point, but it was so big and broad that like I didn't know how I could fully accomplish that. So then after I graduated through cool God stories, I ended up working with this, just have a sparkling water here. So got some bubbles. Anyways, so then I ended up working for this multi-millionaire lady, and I was traveling the world and helping rescue people while capturing it through photo and film and things, and that was amazing. But at the end of the day, I really was like, man, like if it's not all for God, what is even the worth of it? So I ended up leaving there, and I'll explain all this in greater detail at some point. And then, then eventually I met Zadok like a year later, who's my husband now. And it was so crazy because now we're living like, the Christian life is not the easiest life, but is the coolest, most fulfilling life you could ever live. We don't live like an easy life at all, and we don't have all the creature comforts that a lot of people even have, but we have so much more than people overseas. And anyway, so we, in our first year of marriage, started running, Zadok had already been running for like 6 years, his program that's called BSC, Bible Survival Combat, training young men to be bold men of God and to become high-risk missionaries, turning wannabe Navy SEALs into high-risk missionaries. And so when I first heard about him, I was like, wow, there's someone out there actually doing what I'm called to do. And honestly, I was so in love with God and so happy with being single, but yeah, I did want to be married someday, and I was like, I'm not compromising or marrying someone that doesn't line up with my mission, my vision. And honestly, we're going to go into Zadok and I's whole story in a full episode because it will take a long time. But anyways, and honestly, I didn't have to compromise anything. And now I get to train young ladies in being courageous women of God. So we run the BSC program, and I started the young ladies a portion of it, and last year was the first year we ran it, and it was just so cool to see so many young women come alive of that, like that hunger and desire for something more, to do something radical for God and be okay getting dirty, but we are always talking about like be proud being feminine at the same time, and that wholly submitted and surrendered life to God. And so anyways, we actually are running one of those coming up in June. But yeah, that's kind of just like the backstory of what we do. And then also kind of have always known like high risk missions. Like I've been overseas and done stuff like that, but I'm like, Lord, I feel called to the mission field. I don't fully know what that looks like. And it's the same with Zadok. And so actually in August, we'll be leaving for 10 months to the active war zone of Burma. So if you haven't heard about it, it's over 75 years, it's actually been going on of total just like killing off of all the people and the villagers in Burma. There's a whole like tribal different conflicts and everything, but like literally people for like 3 generations have been running for their lives. And so we're going to be going in there with a friend of ours and helping run a program called the Jungle Discipleship School, where we'll be discipling ethnics in how to have a relationship with Jesus. And then also going to different villages and preaching the gospel and bringing presentations to the children. And I'm just so excited. But anyway, so I'm pre-recording a lot of these podcasts, and they'll hopefully release while we're over in Burma, but we'll hopefully have a Starlink while we're over there, so that I can also upload live videos of things that are happening and stuff like that. So anyways, that's kind of like my story in that. So let me check my notes really quick of stuff I wanted to make sure and mention. Okay, so yeah, kind of filled you guys in on a little bit of my story, but we'll go into greater depth at some point in the podcast. But what is Courageous Womanhood? Like this name, Courageous Womanhood, and honestly, like my whole life growing up, like I grew up in the homeschool culture and circle, and it's amazing and has such amazing principles. But I also saw a softness in the women of being like, how, like in Proverbs, it talks about like she strengthens her arms, and the Proverbs 31 woman was so much more than just a housemaker. And I just knew like there's something more. And I talk to young women every single week, multiple times on the phone, and they all have the same questions, and they all are seeing like patterns and different things they've seen growing up, that they're like, there is something more. And I've also seen such that radical feminist movement in our society now. And so automatically a lot of conservative Christians have gone to the polar opposite of that, of being women without vision, because of trying to avoid the radical feminism. And so I tell people all the time, like, there is a middle road. There is that road, that biblical road of being full of tenacity and vigor and strength, because honestly, coming from the high-risk mission field, there are not enough strong women, courageous women on the mission field, because I've also talked to so many young ladies and they're almost worried to go on the mission field because they're worried they won't meet their spouse. And I said, do you want to meet a man of God that is willing to do anything for him? Because if you're not willing to do anything for him, how are you going to meet someone who is the same way? Because I've seen so many young men, and women included, to where they're in their single years living out, radical, courageous womanhood, and then living out true biblical manhood. And then as soon as they get married, they settle down for what's comfortable. And my whole point of this podcast is to realize and inspire people and women to not strive for the comfortable, but strive for what God has, which what God has is often not considered comfortable at all. Like, I can firsthand say a lot of what Zadok and I do in our life is very, very uncomfortable. But are we willing to lay our life down for the King who gave us absolutely everything? And I just saw so much, and I've seen so much of people having no vision for their life. And I've talked to so many young women. I'm like, so like, what are you on this earth for? Like, what do you wake up every morning to live and die for? And what is your vision? And I've heard so many go, well, just love God and become closer to him. And yes, a lot of the church has lost that first love mentality. But at the same time, when you love someone, love also has action. Like, I'm always telling people in my relationship, there's a bug in my hair. There's like a lot of bugs out here. I'm always telling people, like, in my relationship with Zadok, like in a marriage relationship or in any relationship, like if you want someone to know that you love them, you often will do things that show that love, but it's something that will make them feel loved. And I believe, and scripturally, that a lot of the church has taken the gospel as fire insurance instead of realizing Jesus paid everything for them. Why won't you live for him as well? Like, so many people would be like, yeah, I'll die for Christ. I'll die for Christ. I was listening to this message from Daniel Kalenda, and he was talking about the martyr John Chow, and he was saying that so often Christians will be like, yeah, I'll die for Christ. Like, if someone came to my door, and says, if you're a Christian, I'll kill you, a lot would be like, yeah, like, I would die for Christ. But then in real life, they're not living for him. And this is my whole thing. A courageous woman is choosing to live for God. not just die for God, but live for him every moment of every waking day, of realizing like the King, the husband of our souls, is the literal breath inside of our lungs. The reason that we wake up every single day is to do something that impacts not our kingdom on earth, but the kingdom on heaven, and bringing heaven to earth. And I had struggled years ago going, like I had prayed prayers and I was like, Lord, like don't let me die before like I get married and have children and like build this life. Because I knew there was something more, but then it's so easy to like get caught up in the worries and the concerns and the patterns of this world. And because honestly, like in our life, so many people, it's like, oh, you guys don't have a house, or you don't work a normal job, or you don't do this. And like our life and my life is so abnormal to people that they are so confused. And honestly, they think you're absolutely insane. Like they look at you sometimes like you have 4 eyes. Like most people look at Zadok and I, and literally it feels like they look at us like we have 4 eyes, and there is nothing. Like, I don't have a problem with that. Like, I know I'm living for God. And instead of my big thing is, instead of that desire to like fit in, like you're going to be like, living courageous womanhood is not easy. It's not normal. This podcast I know is going to upset some people, because guess what? No one is talking about this. And the reason I really created this is because growing up, like I wish I would have had women speak into my life and say, yes, there's something more. Don't just sit around and waste your life, because often there's this thing about like men going and doing things. But what about women? Like women weren't created to just sit at home. Like being a mother is a beautiful gift from God. Being able to take care of a family and things like that, that is a beautiful gift from God. But I think us Christians have made it more of this like cushiony little life, and build your little flock and build this thing, instead of going, no, like we're gonna live for God first and foremost, and family is part of that, and children are part of that. And how would it shift the world if now women and young women, single women and married women actually started living out courageous womanhood? It would shift society in a biblical, godly way. It would allow men to rise up as women are coming alongside and not being needy women, like whiny and needy and over emotional, and letting their emotions rule their life. Like if women actually stop doing that, we would be able to, men could actually live who they're called to be, because now women are not being a emotional wreck. And like, honestly, like emotions are beautiful. Like I have emotions and I cry, but the Lord had to teach me is, how do I not allow emotions to rule my life, and feelings to rule my life, and fear to rule my life? And obviously we'll get more into that. But that's kind of like, that's what courageous womanhood is. And this whole podcast is going to really take through step-by-step processes and things of how do I shift the norm of what I've been living in. And real quick, I can kind of show you some of the topics that I have laid out. So how it's going to work is I'm planning to release every other week, and then add videos mixed in there. And the first season is going to have 10 episodes. And so I already have the first season planned out. So a lot of the topics I'm going to be covering are like, who are you? Identity as a daughter of the King, and living a life laid down for the gospel, living a life marked by joy, and hearing God's voice, and Jesus, the lover of our soul, navigating relationships. Like I wish, like all of these topics, like I wish women would have talked to me about this, like relationships. Like that was so weird, and like I didn't know how to handle it, and I didn't know how to handle my hormones, and like all this stuff that I'm pouring out on this podcast is questions that I've been answering to young ladies on the phone that have come through BSC, and other young women that I've been mentoring on the phone for a long time, and just talking with them, and they all have the same questions, and I have the same questions, and no one answered them for me. So that's what this is for. And just talk about living a life on mission. And honestly, like our last topic is going to be called Don't Be Afraid to Jump. And so I'm so excited that you all have come along with me in this journey. I'm so excited for just what God's got going this year, what God's going to stir in y'all's hearts. And I'm just so excited. Like God is moving on this earth. And I was talking to a mom yesterday, and she was talking to me about how there's become a stirring in women in this generation of that realizing for something more. like not living that apathetic, easy life. And I can honestly say, like, I wake up knowing why I live and why I exist. And I have the best marriage, but it's not what people like look at as like the perfect little homemaker life. Like, me and Zadok live on mission together, like building the kingdom of heaven. And my life isn't worth anything to myself. Like, your life isn't worth anything to yourself. It's only worth living for something greater than you. And I'm just praying that through this podcast that you will see the handprint and the fingerprint upon your life of calling you higher and calling you deeper into something that's so much bigger and better and greater than you could have ever dreamed, because God is so much bigger and better than we could have ever dreamed. And instead of living in the worries and cares of this life, like Zadok and I have so been tempted to get caught up in that. And we've had times of struggle, but we're going, no, like, we have to keep living this for God. If we never have a nice house, if like we had our first year of marriage without running water, and we're like, if we could try, like Zadok like could go work a normal job, but no, we know we're called to be on mission for God. And all of you, whether you go overseas or not, you are a missionary, because a missionary is someone that's living life on mission for God, and every Christian is called to that. And in the Bible, the disciples, like it, and like it says in the Bible, like and he who gives up, mother or father or son or all of that for my sake. Like, whoa, like we're called to give up everything for the King who gave us everything. And like we hold on so tightly to our comforts, and we hold on so tightly to the comforts of this world. But they never satisfy. They never satisfy. I've been talking to people recently about just the fact that so many, like it's like Christian or whatever, we go, oh, after we do this and this, then we'll go share the gospel. After we do this and this, then we'll go do this. But guess what? It's never enough. Like, the house will never be big enough to be able to eventually start something. The bank account will never be full enough. Because God isn't asking those who are just all trained and perfect and have it all together. He's asking for those who are willing and ready. And that's one of Zadok and I's slogans, like being ready and willing. Be ready in season and out of season. That means one thing in life isn't all perfect and set up, that we're still ready to go. Because honestly, like, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And I think it's time we start living like the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And yeah, I'm preaching, but yeah, I really hope these podcasts inspire you, and I encourage you and ask you to just pray about everything that you hear and just really dive into the heart of God, that this just wouldn't be another podcast. And I pray over all of you guys that listen, and also share this with anyone. I'm planning to upload this to YouTube and hopefully other podcast platforms, but I don't know. This is releasing tomorrow, May 3rd. And so I don't know if I'll have it up on all those platforms, but please share and like and subscribe, because there's going to be some awesome content coming out. It's going to be podcast stuff, and then also I'm going to be doing some videos on, like, because we're going to Burma for 10 months. We're having to backpack everything in. So I'm going to go over, like, for women, like, I wish people would have taught me skills and would have shown me stuff so that was from a Christian perspective. So I'm going to go over, like, all the gear I'm bringing and, like, different things like that, and just real world, real life stuff. And then we also have BSC coming up, so I'm planning to do videos and stuff like that from there. And so this is going to be unique, and it's not like any other conventional podcast. And you know what? I'm great with that, because honestly, like, I wanted to have a podcast studio set up. Like, God told me, I was like, okay, like, I need to set this up. And then I was like, no, that is not the life I live. And so if I don't like what I'm wearing, I'm literally wearing a wool t-shirt. Tank top I'm testing out for Burma to see if it'll work today. And this is who I am, and this is what I'm doing. And I'm just so thankful to God, and thankful for you guys. And yeah, just keep me under prayer and Zadok under prayer as we are just really going headfirst for the kingdom of God, and diving in, and we're so excited. And so, yeah, I look forward to you sticking with me. And if you have any questions or topics you would really love to be covered, go ahead and go to the website and send those in, or give me a call. My phone number's on the website, because I would love to hear from you guys of like topics that you would really like to be covered and stuff like that. So I hope this inspires you and motivates you, and that you just feel the love of God right now. And so I'm just going to go ahead and pray and close this out. Lord, I just thank you so much for everyone that is listening, God, every young heart, every young lady, every woman, God, that you would touch their hearts, God, that you inspire them, that you would burn and kindle a fire inside them that is wholly dissatisfied with the normality of this world, and is so that you just burn a fire for what you have for them, God, of living as missionaries for you, living as life on mission for you, God, and that you would just touch them right now, that they would feel your love and feel your heart over them, God, and feel your presence, Lord, and that you would bless them in Jesus' name. Well, love you guys, and thank you so much for listening.